You didn't actually grow up, you just stopped noticing the world around you. Think back to the summer between 3rd and 4th grade. That single stretch of 3 months felt like an entire geological era. You can probably still remember the exact smell of the chlorine at the public pool, the specific way the sun hit the pavement until it shimmered like water, and the absolute, agonizing eternity it took for Saturday morning cartoons to finally start. Back then, a car ride to your grandmother's house 2 towns over felt like a cross-country expedition. You would press your forehead against the glass and watch the telephone poles go by, counting every single one, because you had nothing but time. You were a time billionaire. But now, you're likely sitting here wondering where the last 3 years went. You look at the calendar and realize it's already October, but your brain is still trying to process what happened in March. It feels like someone bumped the playback speed on your life from 1x to 1.5x, and you can't find the remote to turn it back down. This isn't just a sign that you're getting older or that life is getting busier. It is a biological and psychological glitch that is baked into the way the human brain processes reality. It starts with basic arithmetic. In 1877, a philosopher named Paul Janet proposed something called the proportionality theory, and it is the simplest explanation for why your birthdays seem to arrive faster every year. Imagine you are 5 years old. At that age, one single year represents 20% of your entire existence. It is a massive, towering chunk of everything you have ever known. When you wait for your 6th birthday, you are waiting for a period of time that equals 1/5 of your life. But by the time you turn 50, a year is just 2% of your total experience. It's a tiny, insignificant sliver. To a 5-year-old, a year is an ocean. To a 50-year-old, a year is a puddle. Janet argued that we don't perceive time in absolute units like seconds or hours. Instead, we perceive it as a ratio of the time we've already lived. This is why a summer holiday feels like a lifetime to a child but a weekend trip to an adult. If you think of your life as a long piece of string, the first few inches are bright, vibrant, and feel incredibly long because they are all you have. As the string gets longer, each new inch added at the end feels shorter and shorter in comparison to the massive length that's already there. It's mathematically elegant, and it feels right when you think about it. But your brain isn't a calculator. While the math of proportionality is a good starting point, it doesn't explain the physical sensation of time accelerating. For that, we have to look at the internal machinery of your body. In the late 1990s, a researcher named Peter Mangan conducted a famous study that put this to the test. He took 2 groups of people, one group in their 20s and another group in their 60s, and asked them to do a very simple task. He asked them to sit in a quiet room and tell him when they thought exactly 3 minutes had passed. They weren't allowed to count out loud or look at a clock. They just had to rely on their internal sense of time. The results were startling. The younger group was incredibly accurate. On average, they felt like 3 minutes had passed when the actual clock showed 3 minutes and 3 seconds. They were almost perfectly in sync with reality. But the older group was way off. When they felt like 3 minutes had passed, the actual clock showed 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Their internal clocks had slowed down. Because their internal gears were turning more slowly, the outside world appeared to be moving faster. It's like being in a car that's traveling at 60 miles per hour while everyone else is going 80. To you, it feels like they're screaming past you, even though you're moving at a steady pace. Your internal gears are slowing down. This slowdown is tied to your metabolism and your heart rate. When you're a child, your heart beats faster, your lungs move quicker, and your energy levels are through the roof. Your biological clock is ticking at a high frequency. Because your internal state is so fast, the external world seems slow and languid. As you age, your metabolism drops. Your heart rate slows down. Your body's internal pacemaker starts to lag. This means that in the time it takes your brain to complete one cycle of processing, the actual world has moved further ahead than it used to. This isn't just a metaphor. Research into the circadian rhythms of animals shows that smaller animals with faster metabolisms perceive time in much higher resolution than larger, slower animals. A housefly sees the world in slow motion, which is why it's so hard to hit them with a fly swatter. To a fly, your hand moving toward them looks like a slow, drifting cloud. As humans age, We transition from being the fast-moving fly to being the slow-moving giant. We are losing the high-definition resolution of time, and as a result, the frames of our lives are blurring together. Your neurons are getting lazy. There is also a deeper, more neurological reason for this blur, and it has to do with how your brain handles information. Think about the last time you drove a brand new route to a place you'd never been. The drive probably felt like it took forever. You were looking for street signs, noticing the weird architecture of the houses, and paying attention to every turn. But on the way back home, the drive felt significantly shorter. This is known as the return trip effect, and it happens because your brain is an efficiency machine. On the way there, everything was new. Your brain had to work hard to process all that novel information, so it recorded the journey in high detail. On the way back, the route was familiar. Your brain recognized the landmarks and decided it didn't need to waste energy recording them again. It essentially went on autopilot. As an adult, most of your life is the return trip. You aren't learning how to tie your shoes or what a rainy day feels like for the first time. You've seen it all before. When your brain encounters familiar information, it processes it quickly and doesn't bother creating a detailed memory of it. Routine is a silent eraser. David Eagleman, a neuroscientist who has spent decades studying time perception, found that our sense of duration is directly tied to how much energy the brain spends processing a stimulus. He conducted an experiment called the oddball task. He showed participants a series of identical images on a screen, for example, a brown shoe, followed by one image that was different, like a bright green flower. Even though every image stayed on the screen for the exact same amount of time, the participants consistently reported that the oddball image lasted longer. Their brains had to work harder to figure out what the green flower was, so they dedicated more neural resources to it. This extra processing created a denser memory, which the brain interpreted as a longer period of time. This is why childhood feels so long. To a child, the whole world is an oddball. Every day is a barrage of new sights, sounds, and sensations. The brain is constantly working at max capacity to map out this new reality. But as an adult, you settle into routines. You eat the same breakfast, take the same commute, and do the same job. Your brain stops recording these events because they provide no new survival information. When you look back at a week of routine, your brain sees a blank space. It's like a video editor cutting out all the boring parts of a movie. If you cut out 90% of the footage, the movie ends a lot faster. Memory is the true measure of time. This brings us to one of the most frustrating paradoxes of being human, the holiday paradox. This concept was popularized by psychologist Claudia Hammond, and it describes a weird split in how we experience time. Imagine you go on a 2-week vacation to a country you've never visited. While you're there, time might feel like it's flying by because you're having so much fun and doing so many things. But when you get home and look back on those 2 weeks, they feel like they lasted a month. Compare that to a normal 2-week period at the office. While you're at work, the days feel long and tedious. You're watching the clock, waiting for 5 p.m. But when you look back at those 2 weeks of work, they feel like a single afternoon. This happens because our brains have two different ways of measuring time: perspective and retrospective. Perspective time is how we feel time passing in the moment. Retrospective time is how we judge time based on the memories we've stored. Routine feels long in the moment but short in memory. Novelty feels short in the moment but long in memory. Because adults live lives of high routine and low novelty, we are stuck in a cycle where our days feel long and boring while we live them, but our years feel short and empty when we remember them. The world hasn't changed, your focus has. Another heavy hitter in this field is Mark Whitman, a psychologist who has studied how our sense of self-identity affects our perception of time. In 2005, he conducted a massive survey of nearly 500 people ranging in age from 14 to 94. He found that for short periods, like an hour or a week, there was almost no difference in how people of different ages perceive time. A 20-year-old and an 80-year-old both agree on how long a lunch break feels. But when he asked them to look back over decades, the older participants reported that time had accelerated significantly. Whitman suggested that this is because we use life markers to measure the passage of time. When you're young, you have tons of these markers: Your first day of school, getting your driver's license, your first heartbreak, graduating college, your first job. These are massive, distinct pillars in your memory. As you get older, these pillars become more spaced out. You might go 5 or 10 years without a major life-changing event. Without those pillars to mark the distance, the years in between simply collapse. It's like driving down a highway with no exit signs. You have no way of knowing how far you've gone until you realize you're almost at the end of the road. Attention is a finite currency. We also have to consider the role of dopamine. This neurotransmitter is often called the reward chemical, but its primary job in the brain is actually to track expectations and signal when something important is happening. When you experience something new and exciting, your brain releases a surge of dopamine. This surge acts like a highlighter, telling your brain to pay attention and record what's happening. Researchers like Warren Meck have found that dopamine levels are directly linked to our internal clock. When dopamine levels are high, our internal clock speeds up, which makes the outside world seem to slow down. Children have naturally higher levels of dopamine and more dopamine receptors than adults. They are literally high on life. This is why a child can spend 4 hours playing with a cardboard box and feel like they've lived an entire lifetime. As we age, our dopamine production drops. We become more jaded, which is just a fancy way of saying our brains don't get excited by the world anymore. Without that dopamine-fueled focus, we stop recording the fine details of our lives. We are living in a low-power mode, skimming the surface of our days instead of diving into them. Routine is a form of time travel. If you want to slow down time, the science suggests you have to break the machine. You have to force your brain out of its autopilot mode. This is why people who travel frequently or constantly learn new skills often feel like they've lived longer lives. They are manually injecting novelty into their systems. When you learn to play the violin at age 40, or you decide to learn a new language, you are forcing your brain to create new neural pathways. You are creating those oddball images that Eagleman talked about. You are building new pillars for Whitman's life marker theory. You are essentially tricking your brain into thinking that more time has passed because you've given it more memories to process. It's the closest thing we have to a real-life fountain of youth. Most people think they are saving time by being efficient and sticking to a routine, but they are actually doing the opposite. They are accelerating their journey toward the end. Every time you take the same route home to save 5 minutes, you are effectively erasing the memory of that drive from your life. You saved 5 minutes in reality, but you lost 10 minutes of perceived life. The mirror is lying to you. There is also a social element to this that we rarely discuss. When we are young, our lives are structured by others. We have school bells, sports practices, and parents telling us when to eat and sleep. This external structure provides a constant rhythm that our brains can anchor to. As adults, we often lose that rhythm. We enter the big blur of middle age where the days of the week lose their distinct flavors. Tuesday feels like Thursday. October feels like May. Without those external anchors, our internal sense of time becomes adrift. We start to rely more on digital time, clocks, phones, and calendars, and less on the natural, lived experience of time. This digital time is linear and unforgiving, whereas biological time is flexible. By tethering ourselves so tightly to the clock on the wall, we lose the ability to stretch our internal time. We become slaves to a metric that was never designed to measure the quality of a human life. Your brain is a time-warping machine. We have to look at the work of Adrian Bejan, a professor at Duke University who views this entire problem through the lens of physics. He argues that time acceleration is a result of the degrading quality of our mental images. He points out that as we age, the physical networks of nerves and neurons in our brains grow larger and more complex. At the same time, these pathways begin to degrade. This means that electrical signals have to travel further and encounter more resistance. It's like a fiber optic cable getting tangled and frayed. Because the signals take longer to travel, the frame rate of our mental processing drops. If a child's brain is a high-speed camera capturing 1,000 frames per second, an older person's brain is an old film projector capturing 24 frames per second. Because the child has more frames of the world, their world appears slower and more detailed. The older person has fewer frames, so the world appears to jump forward in jerky, fast-motion segments. It's not just that you're remembering less, it's that you are literally seeing less of the world as it happens. You are living in a lower frame rate. The silence is where the years go. This brings us back to that mundane, relatable feeling of the missing year. You know the feeling. You're talking to a friend and you mention something that happened a few months ago, only for them to point out that it actually happened in 2019. Your brain has compressed those 3 or 4 years into a single event. This is especially common after periods of high stress or collective trauma, like a global pandemic. When every day looks the same, sitting in the same room, looking at the same screen, talking to the same 3 people, your brain has nothing to anchor to. It stops marking the passage of time entirely. In a weird way, a year spent in total isolation can feel like it lasted forever while you were in it, because of the boredom and the focus on the passing seconds. But the moment it's over, that year vanishes from your memory. It becomes a non-event. This is the ultimate danger of the age-related time acceleration. It's not just that time goes fast, it's that the life you've lived becomes invisible to your own mind. You end up with a high odometer reading on your life, but a very small trip log. The clock is not your enemy, your comfort is. The reality is that your brain is trying to protect you. It's trying to save energy by ignoring the familiar. It's trying to keep you safe by encouraging you to stick to what you know. But that protection comes at a massive cost. It costs you the subjective duration of your life. If you want to get your summer of 3rd grade back, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You have to be willing to be a beginner again. You have to seek out the things that make your heart beat a little faster and your brain work a little harder. You have to look at the world with the same oddball intensity that you had when you were 8 years old. You have to stop being a passenger on the return trip and start being the driver on the way there. Time isn't actually moving faster. The universe isn't conspiring to rob you of your years. You are just becoming more efficient at ignoring your own existence. You think you have plenty of time left because you're measuring your life in years, but your brain doesn't care about the calendar. It only cares about how much of the world it actually manages to record. When you look back at your childhood, you see a vast, sprawling landscape because your brain was recording at a massive bit rate. But as an adult, that bit rate has plummeted. If you keep living the way you're living right now, following the same routines, scrolling the same feeds, and avoiding the discomfort of novelty, the next 10 years of your life won't feel like a decade. They will feel like a single, blurred summer. You aren't just losing time, you are losing the ability to perceive that you ever had it. Here is the terrifying math of the human experience. According to several models of perceived time, by the time you reached your 7th birthday, you had already experienced 20% of your total subjective life. Even if you lived to be 80, nearly a quarter of your felt existence was over before you even learned long division. If you don't start noticing things again, the rest of it will be over by next Tuesday. So, what's the last truly new thing you did, and can you remember exactly what it felt like? Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the glitches in our reality, and let me know in the comments, when did you first realize the years were getting shorter?